So welcome to the fifth 2021 webinar, part of the Enabling the Adaptive and Agile Organization with AEquacy webinar series. Today, we will explore the concept of organizational resilience. It was a very interesting discovery for me as well in preparing this presentation. So let me immediately share that a recent study by McKinsey found that the median age of companies listed in the Standard & Poor's 500 list was 85 years in the year 2000. Then it decreased to 33 years in 2018. And now McKinsey believes that in 2027, 75% of the current companies currently quoted on the Standard & Poor's 500 list will have disappeared. They would be bought out, merged, or they will just go bankrupt like Enron or Lehman Brothers. So let's also look at what happened in the last 20 years. 89% of important and innovative companies in their field have disappeared. So this turnover rate has never happened before, and it's mainly due to the inability to look to the horizon and evolve at the same speed of change. Another reason is, for me, is to be found in the inability to adapt to disruptive forces. For example, the advent of digital photography for Kodak, or even Yahoo, a company where I worked in 1998 and until the year 2000, that moved from being #1 to then at some point sit on its laurels while Google made a revolution in the online field. Maybe there is another reason for this short lifespan, and I suggest that the size of companies leads inexorably to more complexity and thus more vulnerability. In short, large companies spend more time managing themselves than they do managing their clients. So to summarize, the turnover rate is mainly to be caused by the lack of resilience. So let's first start with a definition of organizational resilience. Let's say that it is the ability of an organization to anticipate, prepare for, respond, and also adapt to incremental changes, but also sudden disruptions in order to survive and prosper. Let's align on what makes or hinder resilience, like we've done other times. If you join other webinars, I'd like to invite you to join 3 other partners, 3 or 4, it depends on how Denise set up the breakout rooms. In a breakout room, and after briefly introducing yourself, if you don't know the other partners in the call, please take 10 minutes in total to discuss what makes organizations resilient. And here we are talking about the system resilience, not just the individual, not just people being resilient, but the organizational resilience. And also, what are, in your opinion or experience, the major blocks to resilience? And then you will come back in plenary in 10 minutes time. Any question before we send you to the breakout rooms? I see heads doing nah. Okay. So Denise, please, would you mind sending people in the breakout rooms and set up for 10 minutes?
10 minutes. Okay.
Thank you. Welcome back. Let's give a few seconds for everyone to join the plenary. Good. So any comment or, what did you share in your conversations?
Too many things.
It's a little time.
No, actually, that was a very rich discussion for the 10 minutes that we had. And we were five persons. And I felt that's my feeling, that the discussion was really rich.
Okay. So anything that, stuck to your attention?
Okay, if I can start for my team, I have the notes in front of team. So what makes an organization resilient? We have design for fail, so to fail, to failure, and that changes can come from anywhere. Allow people to react, to make decisions, adaptability, flexibility, agile mindset. Have crews instead of teams, so based on the roles, feed the internal motivation, the drive, but also clarify the purpose of the organization, have a culture of support, and establish psychological safety. So these, if I remember well, that these were the elements that make organizations resilient. And some of the major blocks we had is the bureaucracy, trends to do things the old way, hierarchy, and when goals are set without being linked with a purpose.
Really very rich. I don't know who now dares to add anything to this.
I might have missed something, so someone from the team can add.
Did you mention the concept, Katerina, about the crew versus team, the crew concept of the sailing boats?
Yes, crews versus team, where the crews are focused on the roles.
Okay, sorry. Cool.
Okay. Anything else? If there is anything else.
Well, from the other group, there is not much in addition that we can say to that, of course. I perhaps just focus which are the elements as a subset of that elements that we focused on the most. And it were for us, for the elements that makes an organization resilient, we talk about, of course, the flexibility and adaptability that is required when a major change happens or something like, for example, COVID happens. That's one of the major things. Another important points are clear direction, okay, from the top of the organization, but at every level of the organization. And together with this, of course, communication and alignment. But not in a top-down way, but in a way where you involve the organization and you engage the organization. And of course, trust. Trust is the glue. It's very important to have trust among the people. So at the end of the day, what we were saying is what makes organizations resilient is people. And also the more people is resilient individually, the more the organization becomes resilient. So in terms of what are the major blocks to resilient, we were talking about the rigidity of the people and the organization toward the change. So the closeness, the closure that people can have toward change and also the organization. And we talked about also the lack of empathy. When there is a change, when the leaders, for example, in an organization wants to apply a change, one of the things that could prevent for this resilience in the organization is not to be empathetic enough to understand what is the impact in the organization, to be able to really bring the people on board, and on the contrary, create the closure. And if I missed something, please, my group, if you want to add anything else. No.
Oh,
I don't want to say anything else.
I'd like to say from an individual point of view, sometimes your boss can block you from being resilient as well, because you several times you follow what your boss tells you.
Yeah.
The way you have to act or the way you have to react. And if you want to be resilient in terms of being innovative or being prepared to change, and your boss doesn't want to change, then it's part of the hierarchy and it's part of the process and the structure.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing it. I don't want to, is there anyone else before we move forward?
There's something else that came to my mind is about transparency. So we cannot make decisions. We cannot have, put in practice the agile mindset if there is no transparency. We don't know what's going on.
Exactly.
There.
Exactly. Oh, thank you for this sharing. My sense is that you have really fruitful conversations, and I hope that I will give you a new way of looking at resilience, I found a very interesting model that I would like to share with you. And it made a lot of sense to me, so I hope that it makes sense for you as well. So understanding the dynamics of resilience has assumed, of course, increasing urgency in the face of challenges such as natural disaster, terrorism, pandemics, economic recession, mass migration, cyber threats, et cetera, and also a host of other social, political, and economical trends. And resilience is required for businesses to, of course, respond to disruptions as well as positively adapt in the face of challenging conditions, leveraging the opportunities and delivering sustainable performance improvement. So simply put, senior executives need to both ensure against bad events and at the same time adapt and change before the cost of not doing so becomes too great. So research and thought leadership on organizational resilience has developed over the last 40 years in several different fields. And Professor Denier of the Cranfield School of Management identified 5 distinct phases with 5 contrasting, I would say, perspectives. So let's start with the first one, a defensive perspective that focused on loss avoidance and value preservation drove the first 2 phases. So the first phase is the preventative control. It means that organizational resilience is achieved by means of risk management, physical barriers, redundancy, system backups, standardized procedures, which protect the organization from threats and allow it to bounce back from disruption to restore, let's say, a stable state. So, and it's what you see on the screen. Now, the second one is called mindful action. So organizational resilience, as many of you said, is produced by people. So people notice and react to threats and respond effectively to unfamiliar or challenging situation. At some point, it soon became recognized that organizational resilience was not only about learning to bounce back, but also the ability to bounce forward, to grow and prosper in the future. And there are another 2 phases and perspective on how this could be achieved. The first one is performance optimization, or at least, this is the name that the professor gave to this model. So the organizational resilience in this case is formed by continually improving, refining, extending existing competencies, enhancing ways of working, exploiting current technologies to serve present customers and present markets. The fourth one is adaptive innovation. In this area here, organizational resilience is created through creating, inventing, exploring unknown markets, new technologies. So organizations can be the disruption in their environment themselves. And lastly, there is a fifth phase, paradoxical thinking, but I would like to keep it on a side and we will come back later on that. So let me say that the thinking on organizational resilience has evolved over time. And it seems that there are 2 core drivers. One is defensive, so meaning stopping bad things happen. And the other one is progressive, meaning making good things happen. And also there is a division between approaches that call for consistency and those that are based on flexibility. So if we place these approaches in a matrix that has 2 axes, like you see in the chart, one that has consistency and flexibility at the 2 opposites, and one that has defensive and progressive at the 2 opposites, then start with the first one. The preventative control is in the defensive consistency quadrant. Mindful action is in Parabolic, so I put performance optimization is in the progressive consistency quadrant. Mindful action is in the defensive flexibility quadrant, and adaptive innovation is in the progressive flexibility quadrants. So these 4 viewpoints form an integral part of a framework, let's say, which Professor Daniel termed the organizational resilience tension quadrant. So I would like with you to look at each of these quadrants. So let's start with preventative control. And let's see what happens when it is at its best and when it lacks. So would you mind moving the chart forward? Fantastic, thank you. So preventative control, society expects organizations and critical infrastructures to be safe, secure, dependable. So regulating the system involves protecting it from threats by promoting constancy and predictability. So the ultimate goal of regulation is to produce fail-safe system designs. The focus is on excellence in operating procedures, certification, competence, assessment, etc. So resilient organizations, if looking at this lens, in this sense, make precautionary measures in the face of potential problems. So these actions include arrangements such as business continuity plans, training for emergency responses, etc. But how can we see if the system is weak in this area? So when organization, we observe there is strong rigidity, as you mentioned it before, inefficient and complex systems and processes, or if there are habits taking the place of the written procedure, we know that the organization is not resilient. So let's move to mindful action, the second one. Here, to be resilient is to be prepared for adversity, which requires improvement in the capacity to investigate, to learn, and to act. So if individuals gain control of the key task behaviors, and if they exercise discretion in performing those actions, they develop a sense of efficacy and competence. And with it, people are better able to respond effectively in situations that are unfamiliar, challenging, and also to persevere in the face of failures and challenges. In this kind of, when the focus is on mindful action, it means that alternative voices and perspectives are encouraged. So these voices search for disconfirming evidence and challenge the assumptions that people are making. So when employees have experiences that add to their growth or their competence, their expertise and efficacy, they are more likely to exercise behaviors such as judgment, discretion, and imagination that help their ability to cope with unfamiliar events. On the contrary, when in organizations we observe that there is a lack of accountability, lack of attention to problems, inability to challenge the current thinking, or maybe when issues are, go unquestioned, those are all signs that the organization is weak from a resilience point of view, from a mindful action point of view. Let's move to performance optimization. Typically, optimization involves process enhancement, including the refinement, the extension, the exploitation of existing assets and competencies, of technologies. So optimization often involves formalized structures for authority and decision-making, a focus on internal integration through planning, coordination, resource allocation. So when in an organization there is an attachment to how things have always been done, you mentioned this again, we've always done this way. So when there is this lack of interest or focus of thinking about doing things better or doing better things, lack of leadership, then the organization is experiencing a lack of resilience in this particular performance optimization kind of approach. Finally, let's talk about adaptive innovation. In today's business environment, the rapid production of knowledge and innovation is really critical to organizational survival. So organization can no longer engage in technical change by just applying known solutions, current know-how that can be implemented by experts. Instead, they need to engage in adaptive change that requires going beyond any expertise to mobilize discovery, shedding some entrenched way of doing things, or tolerating losses and generating a new capacity to thrive anew. And this requires experiments, new discoveries, inventions from different parts of the organization. To stop complacency, leadership may be required to conflict, so to create controversy and foster discomfort. So leadership can also help to create an atmosphere that tolerates dissent and divergent perspectives. Again, on the contrary, if the organization experiences groupthink, if there is a lack of diversity and debate, if there are silos, these are all signs that the company lack resilience in terms of adaptive innovation. Now, I would like to stop here for a moment and asking you, what happens to you when I share these 4 elements, and also what is, in your opinion, the most important element of resilience that must be present in organizations?
Giovanna, hi, this is Eva.
Hi, Eva.
Ciao.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good morning.
No, good evening.
Good evening, okay.
I had never seen this model, but it does remind me of the adaptive leadership model from Harvard Kennedy School. And one of the things, it's quite similar, they call disorienting. The leader has to ask disorienting questions. So it's not to create comfort, and it's to create a productive level of discomfort. So very much in tune with much of what you've brought. But one element responding to a question is the ability to face loss. There is no innovation without loss. There is no adaptation without loss, even in nature. And we lose to gain. But we humans are so loss aversive. I don't know what's the word in English. So the only thing that I'm missing here is this space of talking why we need to adapt to what are we going to lose, because sometimes losses are only imaginary and sometimes they're real. But in order to gain what? So that's I think also an element of resilience.
Absolutely. And also the ability to say no to something. I mean, in many organizations that I met in the leadership team, when they talk about focusing on their core products, they talk about it, but then they don't want to let go of any other of the non-important products. So I said, you cannot keep all of them on the plate, because there's no room. You're wasting energy. Thank you, Eva. Thank you for your comment. Anything else? Anyone else?
I'm trying to explain with my poor English what I want to say, because I live a change of mindset in organization when I worked from a company about 15 years ago, and what all these new schemes generate is a higher turnover. I don't know if now it's still possible, but about 15 years ago, and higher people turnover was a problem, finally, because we were 20, and at the end we were 5, 6. And so, because a lot of people leave the company. if you are not able to see what you are going to do, you can leave the company. I don't know if it's a good or a weak, it's the best or weak. Maybe it's good.
Let's say that if the organization loses people because people decide to leave, probably the best people would leave, and they take with them their know-how and their abilities. So even the time and energy spent to rehire new people is not a loss, but it's a cost.
It takes some years.
Yeah, it takes time, it takes money, it takes energy. If the company decides to lay off people because of cost cutting, and we've seen so many cost cutting initiatives in the last 20 years, it may reduce their ability to, probably they need to, make the organization thinner, but probably in doing so, they also lose in resilience. So, yeah. Okay, let me add something now. No, but you didn't tell me what is for you the most important element among these four. And so these four are the preventative control, performance optimization, mindful action, and adaptive innovation. What is the most important that must be present in organization?
Giovanna, if I may, Cristina.
Sì, ciao Cristina.
Ciao. I think that the imaging and creative part is the one that relates to what we discussed in our room, because we all agreed on the organizational aspect and the need for communication, the need for synergy between people. So if you have, if you push on this adaptive innovation, it's because you have the people to do it, because you can't reach this stage if you don't have the correct organization, flexible, adaptive, and whatever. So it tends to, I tend to say that, of course, the imaging new things and creative and going forward is the best. But of course, it's also maybe the most difficult, because in the base, there is also and always the fear to lose, as I don't remember the name, Eva said before, the loss of losing, because the fear, we know, is something that really paralyzes. And so if you individually have the fear to lose your job, the fear to lose something, and this is transferred to the whole organization at the end. So
yeah, well, of course, where there is fear, there is no innovation. It's very difficult to innovate. Yeah,
because you can't let go what you have.
Yeah. Anybody with a different point of view? Anybody who think that any of the other elements would be the most important element?
There are two things that stood out for me. One was, the first is connected because it's on one side, the results and analysis paralysis. So you can have all these beautiful brains that are safe to explore, but if there is not a result to focus there and say, this is what it is, you can be lost in these ideas. So this is the one. And the second is about the quick fixes, which is very tempting when there are crises or change of circumstances. But if there is not a long-term plan inside, these quick fixes can be counterproductive. They can create even a mess, So these two things.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's make another step. So I told you to put on aside paradoxical thinking And now it's the time to talk about it. So more recently, a new, let's say a fifth strand of thinking on organizational resilience has emerged that in a way integrates and balances the four approaches. So to put it simply, senior leaders must manage the tensions between the four approaches if organizations are to be truly resilient. So to bridge these four elements requires paradoxical thinking, which is the fifth element. In paradoxical thinking, organizational resilience is achieved by balancing preventative control, mindful action, performance optimization, and adaptive integration, and managing the tensions that are inherent in this very distinct perspective. And these tensions are always seen as separate opposite with an either-or choice. However, accepting and engaging with these tensions enable people to live and thrive with paradox. So tensions can create conflicts and inconsistencies that motivate a search for new possibilities and can inspire learning, discovery, creativity. So an overemphasis on the defensive agenda, so in the bottom of the model, impedes resilience because the organization becomes inflexible and unproductive. But an overemphasis on the progressive agenda, so on the top part of the model, impedes organizational resilience because a unitary emphasis on achieving more from less can result in excessive cost cutting. And so senior leaders need also to manage the tension between consistency and flexibility. So in the presence of hierarchy, and please move to the new slide, very often there is an underutilization of mindful action and adaptive innovation. For example, a typical issue in hierarchical organizations is that those with expertise who are closest to the problem are not empowered to act and make decisions, or maybe that people diffuse responsibility for taking action. Another typical situation in hierarchical organizations is, as we mentioned, a singular focus on short-term productivity gain or cost cutting. So this has proved pretty detrimental to sustainable performance. Another one, is when the hierarchical organization feels the threat of impending crisis. So organizations tend to control resources and expenditure and focus on the one thing that they do well, for example, their core products or service. And by doing so, by implication, the range of options open to the organization narrows. It becomes progressively more difficult to, for example, to reverse decisions. And the organizations loses the capability to adopt better alternatives. So in general, we can say the hierarchical organization were built in order to predict and control and create consistency. So they tend naturally to develop preventative control and performance optimization, while often, not always, but often mindful action and adaptive innovation are less developed. So moving on, let's quickly see how AEquacy is better positioned to build and maintain resilience. So, next one, preventative control, for example, is strengthened by the AEquacy smart systems. So smart systems allow a constant focus on keeping the system simple and flexible and to update and enhance them constantly. Another one is that structure and roles are dynamic and people are accustomed to consider different points of view. Performance optimization is also strength because the strategy implementation cycle is 3 months. And if there are sudden changes in the environment or in the business, the organization can easily adjust its course and make changes. Another one, in AEquacy, we have a fast and effective decision-making protocol. Is the constant decision-making that I mentioned many times. That by considering and giving space to all points of view, avoids that strong personalities affirm their ideas without being challenged. Mindful action is strengthened because people are provided with the necessary authority to make decisions if they see problems or tensions in the domain of their roles. So this makes people highly accountable and responsive in case of problems. The constant attention to system awareness makes everyone more sensitive to notice tensions and seeking a resolution to them. System awareness is spread also thanks to roles such as the cross-link. It's a specific role that has the purpose of pollinating the organization with ideas taken from one team to another. Adaptive innovation is strengthened thanks to the iterative approach to the business. That means that when launching or improving a new product, a service, or a process, taking an iterative approach with making prototypes and beta versions can help people develop a minimal viable product to test, and then expands gracefully with future prototypes and testing, and making this cycle very, very fast. So the iterative process gives anyone the ability to refine and revise a product quickly, especially if you have an initial version of a product but still need to identify detailed features and functions. So these are, we spent more time on the consistency tension model in this webinar, but I found it pretty interesting to look at resilience through these these 5 lenses. And we believe that AEquacy is really well organized for resilience. So as we are approaching the end, I would like to hear a few of you about what are you taking away from the webinar? It can be also one word, it's fine.
I'm taking away a question.
Good.
How AEquacy good position in the quadrant? We saw that hierarchy is toward the left. Where AEquacy good position in those quadrants? That's my question.
Well, I think that every design has its challenges. So ciao Massimo. If hierarchy is positioned more on the left side, I suppose that AEquacy, or at least in my experience, is a little bit positioned on the right side.
The right.
Yes. So in AEquacy, you need to remember that you need to, to have a very strong infrastructure before you move forward on innovation, and which is the natural tension, the natural vocation of the organization. What do you think when you think of AEquacy?
What do I think?
Yeah,
I would have imagined towards the right.
Yeah.
So not in the center, but towards the right.
Yeah. Well, being in the center is really difficult. I mean, it's really challenging because progressive. I mean, traditional versus progressive. It's two completely, the really opposite view. I hope that in AEquacy, leadership is more flexible to include paradoxical thinking. I mean, if you accept to move to AEquacy, probably you are better positioned to have a paradoxical approach. Thank you, Anna. Anyone else? Brian, you were very silent at the end, in this webinar. What happened? You're on mute.
I'm being distracted. I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay. So, Eva, yes. What do you take away? Share with us.
Yeah, I love the model. Great food for thought. As I said, it reminds me of the other model I worked with. And I would see AEquacy. So if I put together with the other model, nature conserves and innovates at the same time. It doesn't innovate in everything. So I would see AEquacy, from what I've seen so far, moving towards all quadrants. That's how I would see it. But anyway, lots of thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Let me hear from another one and then we'll close.
It's hard to summarize what we're taking away, because it's you know, it's too rich and there is a lot to think about, but it's also expanding expanding perspectives, also our own perspectives and understanding. So yeah, appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. Fantastic. So let's go to the last piece, which is always the same. Probably you know it by heart. So for those who come to all the webinars, remember that the organization 2020, the research results are free on the website to download. The next AEquacy webinar it will be on June 24th, and we will talk about igniting an innovation mindset. On June the 30th, there is the AEquacy tester, and if you haven't experienced any AEquacy, in any way AEquacy, I strongly recommend you to spend a few hours in this workshop, which is really interesting. And also the facilitators training for becoming AEquacy facilitators starts in July, so we're close to it. So thank you very much for being with us today, and thank you for being patient with my problems with the sharing. And thank you very much, Denise, for helping me. Even if you haven't seen the presentation in your life, you did a fantastic job. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Giovanna.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Giovanna.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.